Hey, welcome back to Middle is Apologetics. Yes, I got the name right. Got to think sometimes. I'm really kind of wrapped up in what he's saying here. I'm going on to part three, I think. Whether I put it out there or not, I don't know. But we're just kind of continuing on with Roy Runyon and picking up where he left off here. As you can see, everything. And let me make this a little bit smaller. There we go. And that way, I don't know. Hopefully my picture wasn't blocking it, but here we go.
But, okay, I've got something popped up here I need to, that's probably pop up every time I do this. Okay, anyway, so we see then that even the verse that he quotes in trying to make that application is in present tense, and it refutes his own argument that the law passed at the cross. But
and I'm going to make this point again and again and again. He doesn't understand what present tense mean, and present tense doesn't mean happening right here and now. It means there's an ongoing effect of something that is continuing effect. He came, and because he came, sin was taken care of. So this started in the past, and it continues on. It just continues on. He doesn't understand that what a present tense is.
We could talk a whole lot about that. I'm not going to. What I want us to focus on is his statement that every promise made in the Old Covenant had to come to pass in order for the Old Covenant to end. So, in that conversation, I pressed him then.
And of course, I've clarified it in the last two videos, and I'll clarify it again here. It had nothing to do with every prophecy ever written. He goes on to here to say that prophecy and promise are the same thing, and they are not. Prophecy is a foretelling of what is going to happen. A promise is an agreement made between two people. I promise I will send you the letters. And so one day I sent you the letters. This isn't a prophecy. I don't prophesy that one day I will send you the letters. That's not prophecy. It's not telling of the event. That means that I am making a promise that one day I will do something, and this will happen, and I will keep this word in what I'm promising what will happen. And so prophecy and promise are two different things. Again, poor scholarship.
That since all prophecy, and see in my mind, a promise from the Old Covenant was prophecy.
And that's simply not true in your mind. And that's the failure on your part, Roy. Promise. Like I said, if I promise to mail you 3 letters 3 days from now, that is not a foretelling of prophecy of something that is going to happen. That is telling you what I am going to do. Two totally different things.
It's like, duh. But anyway, I said, all promises have been fulfilled. And I pointed out 2 or 3 things, and he said so. And I said, congratulations, you're now a full preterist. Well, then he came back. And we'll go and I'll show you what he said in response to that. So we go back to the desktop. Hopefully this will work again here. And just a little bit later in the conversation, then he makes the statement again, every promise made by God would be fulfilled. That is not the same thing as every prophecy. So Stephen is dichotomizing between promise and prophecy. But again, we want to,
and that is basically the truth. I've explained why Roy is wrong on that. Prophecy is not promises.
I want to focus on this and try to make sure this thing works again here. And I believe it did. Yes, hopefully this technology works here. So when we look then at Stephen saying that a promise is not the same as prophecy. So I want to use that, I want to look at that and apply his own argument, his own logic, his assertions here about the promise. Now remember, he said every promise in the Old Covenant had to be fulfilled in order for the Old Covenant to pass.
You see, he doesn't understand what I said. So he keeps repeating every promise, Every promise made in the covenant, every promise is made between the two parties, has to be fulfilled and kept. That's what iota and dot is all about. It is not about every prophecy.
Pass away. But then he argues that the old covenant passed away at the cross. And again, I want to look at this and I want to show you his error, and not just because that this is his error, but this is the error of all futurist eschatologies, because they all say that the law of Moses ended at the cross. So
in the last video, I gave you all the theological reasons why it ended. And basically, I will reiterate here for those people watching here. If the law of Moses requires animal sacrifices, and Jesus presents the one person, or God presents Jesus as the one person to make an end to all sacrifices, he becomes the new high priest. Therefore, where there's a change in the priesthood, there's also a change in the law. If there is a change in the law, that means the old law is no longer valid. It is the new law where he says, I write the law in their hearts, and I will remember their sins no more, which means that the law has changed. They're no longer required animal sacrifices. Therefore, the old, like a will, had to end. It had to end. That covenant ended, was completed, was done with.
Since Stephen admits that every promise, the old covenant, had to come to pass in order for the old covenant to pass, and that the old covenant could not pass away until every promise was fulfilled, then this is what we're going to take Stephen to task on in this video. And I'm going to demonstrate to you that Stephen doesn't even agree with himself. Okay?
Because,
now,
see,
when
he says, I don't agree with himself, because, yeah, that's going to happen because he doesn't understand the premise of what I was saying. Therefore, when he reads and we read other scriptures, I'm talking about the promises of eternal life, the promise of the resurrection, all of those promises that happen afterwards. We're not part and parcel of the terms and the conditions of. Again, God never says, I will be your God and I will raise you up on the last day. I promise that you'll be resurrected. I promise that there will be a great white throne judgment. Those are not part of the promises. Sorry.
we look, for instance, at Revelation chapter 21, and you know this like the back of your hand, this passage says, John says, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And now John saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them. They shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. There shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain. Why? For the former things are passed away. Now,
the former things have passed away. Yes, all the old things has passed away.
I want you to hang on to that passage, because we're going to come full circle back to this passage or at least near the end of this video. Now, what I want us to look at then, as we begin to think about every promise of the old covenant had to be fulfilled in order for the old covenant to pass away, then I want us to look at Ezekiel chapter 37. And we'll go here, Ezekiel.
So he's going to try to associate prophecy here as being a promise and part of the terms of the covenant. And these are not terms of the covenant. That's his whole basis of misunderstanding and his lack of understanding of these points. I don't even know why I bother. 37. And again, if you're not familiar with this text here in the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, then I want you to read the entire chapter, because I'm not going to read all this and take up a whole lot of your time. You can do that at your convenience, okay? But this is the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. And what is interesting, so interesting about this is that Ezekiel is told to prophesy upon these bones, all these dry bones in this valley. And he does, and they reassemble themselves, muscle, skin, and so forth, comes upon them, and they stand up a large army, okay? Ezekiel is told to prophesy to the wind, and the wind blows and breathes life into them. Now, notice here what this is.
Verse 11, then he said unto me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Now,
Okay, so in this prophecy, he's talking about the resurrection of Israel, the return of Israel from after being in exile. After the exile, the nations, Babylon and all the people came back from those nations and reestablished Israel. And that is what it's talking about in the Ezekiel passage. And so that was fulfilled, of course, in the days, after Antiochus Epiphanes and everything else in those days, after the return from Babylon, the idea of, Nehemiah, and all of them when they rebuilt the temple. That's what they're talking about. That is the promises that Israel would not be completely lost and destroyed and never appear again. But this is a promise that God would raise Israel back up again and make her a nation once again. And so that is the basis of this whole prophecy.
notice that. It's not the divided house. This is the whole house.
Yes, which includes all 12 tribes. Now, does that happen is what part of what happens during this intertestament, after the intertestament times? Does all 12 tribes come back? Yes. We have all 12 tribes. Scripture talks about all 12 coming back and being a part of Judah.
The whole house of Israel is represented as being dead. Okay? This valley of dry bones. But this is the whole house of Israel. And notice he says, therefore prophesy and say unto them, thus saith the Lord God, behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come up out of your graves and bring you into the land of Israel.
He is using resurrection language to speak about something metaphorically. Because, Isaiah 26:19, your dead shall live, their bodies will rise out of the grave. He's using that as metaphorical, the literal idea of resurrection, because they understood what a resurrection was, even in these days. As the prophets, Elijah had raised people back from the dead. And so, I will open up your graves and cause you to come up out of your grave and bring you into the land of Israel. So he's using the image of a resurrection where literal bodies come out of the grave to be talking about the land of Israel rising up out of the graves of where she's been scattered and the reconstitution of Israel as a nation again.
And you shall know that I am the Lord when I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you up out of your graves. And I will put my spirit.
And it's kind of funny then. There it is, being used metaphorically. You can't use something metaphorically that's not literal. So in the promise of the resurrection in the New Testament is people that come up out of the graves. I mean, it's repeated so many times, up out of the grave. And, the dust turns.
In you, and you shall live. So it's obvious that this is resurrection. Okay, this text is dealing with resurrection. And this valley of dry bones represents the whole house.
Resurrection, he says it so many times, but doesn't ever bring the correlation into the New Testament where it talks about the resurrection of the dead, that it's people coming out of the graves, the dust.
House of Israel. You see that? Okay, then as the chapter continues here, then we have the text here dealing with the two sticks. Okay, and Ezekiel is told to write upon one stick for Judah and the children of Israel, and then the other stick he's to write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, for all the house of Israel and his companions, and he is to join them in his hand, and they would become one stick. Do you see that? They would become one in his hand. Okay. Again, they would ask, what's all this about, Ezekiel? And he would tell them that these two sticks represent the two houses of Israel, and he's going to put them in his hand, and they are going to become one stick.
And did that happen? Yes. That's what we're saying. By the time we get to the point of John the Baptist, we have seen all 12 tribes there. They are all one stick. This is all fulfilled. Nobody is arguing that, is there? Are they? And so, like, what is he coming to? That's a promise. You see, this is prophecy, and it's foretelling of a future events. Is there? I will promise to be your God, and you will be my people. You see the different context there. That it is not a promise about the covenant. Because they are in covenant, God says, "I've scattered you. I've punished you. Now I promise I will bring you back into the land and restore you, all 12 tribes of you, back into the land from which I drove you because of your rebellion." Wow.
See that? And he says, I will make them one nation. So this represents the two sticks being joined in his hand to become one stick, represents the reunification of the two houses of Israel into one nation. I will make them one nation. They shall be no more two nations. Do you see that? They will not be divided into two kingdoms anymore. So again, resurrection and the reunification of both houses of Israel, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, they're going to be reunited. They're going to be one nation. They're not going to be divided into two kingdoms anymore. When this takes place, this what this prophecy is talking about. And Messianic David would be their one shepherd. He would be their prince. Now notice this. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant. So, folks, is there any question as to what this is talking about and the time frame of this and what this is talking about? The everlasting covenant. This shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will place them, multiply them. I will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. You see that? My tabernacle also shall be with them.
Okay, let's go back there and point something out. I want to do it. Ezekiel 37. So he goes through there, all the way through the Son of Man, these bones of the whole house of Israel. You shall know that I am the Lord. I will open your graves. I will place you in your own land. Then you shall know that I am the Lord. I have spoken, and I will do it. So this is talking about the time of Jesus when he brings them back. So the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, take a stick. Now this is a kind of a separate prophecy. I will take the people of Israel from the nations among them who have gone, and I will take them from all around and bring them to their own land. I will make them one nation in the land. They shall not defile themselves anymore in their idols and detestable things, but I will save them from their backslidings and on which they have sinned, and I will cleanse them, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God. This is referring then, of course, and one king shall be king over them all. This is Jesus. No longer divided into two kingdoms. They shall defile themselves anymore with idols and their detestable things, but I will save them and all of that. So we're talking about the coming of Jesus. My servant David shall be king over them, Jesus, and they shall have all one shepherd. They shall walk in my rules and be careful to obey my statutes. They shall dwell in the land that I gave to my servants Jacob, where your fathers lived. They and their children's children will dwell there forever. And David, my servant, shall be their prince forever. People they dwell in the land where your fathers lived, and their children, and dwell there forever. Did they dwell there forever? No. Because of the rebellion during those times, the Pharisees and Sadducees, they were destroyed and scattered again. So did they dwell there forever? No. So their children's and their children's children did not dwell there forever. David, my servant, shall be their prince forever. Jesus. I will make a covenant. I will make. This is not the same covenant as the one that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will make a covenant of peace with them. A covenant of peace. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will set them in their land and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in their midst forevermore. What sanctuary is that? The third temple? Second temple? No. That is talking about Christians. My dwelling place shall be with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forevermore. This is also referring to as he tried to point out, Revelations 21, when the New Jerusalem descends out of heaven, Jesus is the king over all of them. They will obey his rules and statutes, and that is just typology type of language to say that people will follow him. They that dwell in the land, I give them to my servant Jacob, where your fathers lived, and they and their children will dwell there forever. And David, my servant, shall be their prince forever. So we're talking about the kingdom of God, Jerusalem, coming down to earth. And I will make a covenant peace, the new covenant. It'll be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will set them in their land and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in their midst forever. My dwelling place, again, Revelation 21, will be with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord, who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary is in the midst forevermore, when his church is there forevermore. And that parallel can be associated with that. But that's not something that he is going to understand.
Yea, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And the heathen shall know that I, the Lord, do sanctify Israel, when my sanctuary...
See that right? I will make a covenant of peace with them. See, he misses that whole context there. He's trying to say that's the same covenant as before. But the new covenant is the new covenant. So it's not the same covenant, people. And I will make a covenant of peace. Wow. I don't see how he's trying to draw that into that. But that's called manipulation.
Shall be in the midst of them forevermore. And that's what he said right here in verse 26. But I want you to pay particular attention to this phrase right here. My tabernacle shall also be with them. Yea, notice this, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Now, let's look at what Paul said during his ministry. Paul states in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, when he tells them, be not unequally yoked together with the unbelievers, what concord hath Christ with Belial? Notice what he says here. And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple, notice this, you are, that's present tense, you are the temple of the living God.
And does he fail to note that this is under the terms of the new covenant, not the old? You got to remember that. This is agreement, the temple of God with idols. For you are the temple of the living God. Now that we have the Holy Spirit within us, we are the temple. No longer do we need a temple building to go to, but we are the living temple. So this is the new covenant that he is talking about.
As God has said. Do you see that? As God has said. Well, where did God say this? Well, we just read it in Ezekiel 37:26 and following. Not to mention a host of other places in the Old Testament where this is stated. But notice this. I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Do you see that?
Yeah, new covenant.
That is verbatim what we read in Ezekiel 37.
Yes, it is, because he's talking about the new covenant. What's going to happen during the days when Israel is regathered? A new covenant will be established. It will come forever. I mean, I just pointed that out. My servant David shall be king over them. That's talking about Jesus. And they shall have one shepherd, and they shall walk in my rules. That is all the Christian age that is talking about the new covenant. Boom. Sorry, Roy.
7, verse 26, right here. Verse 27, excuse me. Ezekiel 37:27. My tabernacle also shall be with them, yea, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And here is Apostle Paul during his ministry, quoting that phrase verbatim and telling the Corinthians, you are, present tense, the temple of the living God. Wherefore come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. And I will be a father unto you, and you shall be my sons and daughters. Same thing that he said right here. You'll be my people. You'll be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. Now watch this.
Yes, it's all underneath the new covenant.
Having therefore these, what? Promises. Do you see that there, folks? Huh? See what he says here?
Go back. You see what he's doing. He's linking up several different passages together. 2 Corinthians 6:17. Let's see something here. What? Where's he at? 2 Corinthians, excuse me. My mistake there. Second Corinthians 16. What? Oh, 6. Gee, no wonder. What did I do now? Oh, let's see. It's chapter 6. My eyesight's not quite as what it would be. The temple. Do not be unequally with the unbelief, for what partnership as we have spoken. Where's he looking at? Second Corinthians 6:17. So let's go down there. Again, that's a quotation from the Old Testament. What accord has Christ with Baal? What portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God, as God has said. And he's quoting an Old Testament passage, right? To talk about living in the new covenant, not the old covenant. I will make my dwelling among them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore go out from the midst, and be separate from them, says the Lord, and touch not unclean things. Then I will welcome you, and I will be father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says the Lord Almighty. So he's using that passage to talk about what? Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. But what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? For what fellowship has light with darkness? What accord has Christ with Belial? So he's talking about under the terms of the new covenant. Don't go, you guys are the temple of the living God. So don't make your dwelling place with those other unbelievers. And he's using an Old Testament passage. I will be your father. I mean, your sons and daughters. You guys are to be separate. You be my people. Therefore, go out from this and be separate from them. That's the point he's making. Be separate from them. Don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. Be different. Be separate. That is the point that Paul is getting at with that.
Sons and daughters, same thing that he said right here. You'll be my people. You'll be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. Now watch this. Having, therefore, these, what? Promises.
What promises?
Do you see that there, folks? Huh? See what he says here?
Yeah, let's look at 2 Corinthians 7. Since we have these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bring holiness to completion in the fear of God. So what's the promise? What are promises? What's the promise? Not to be unequally yoked. He will make a dwelling among them and walk among them. They will be my people. Therefore go out from the midst of them. Don't touch unclean things. I will welcome you. I will be a father to you. These are the promises, right? These are the promises in terms under the new covenant, not the old. So if you're living in the new, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bring holiness to completion, the fear of God. Make room in your hearts for us. We have wronged no one. We have corrupted no one. We have taken advantage of no one. So then he goes on with that. So what is his point? Let's see here.
Now, see if technology is working. Yeah, I believe it is. It's just slow this morning. All right, hang on, give me just a second. Okay, now, as you just saw there with your own eyes, you read this with your own eyes. Paul said, quoting Ezekiel 37:27 verbatim, he quotes here in 2 Corinthians 6:16 and applies that present tense to the Corinthians as being ongoing right then. And then he says, having, therefore, these promises. So this is a double whammy to futurism and to Stephen's error. But when he says that every promise in the Old Covenant had to be fulfilled before the Old Covenant could pass away, as difficult.
See, what he screwed up here totally, Roy, I mean, you just totally messed this up, is that in the Old Testament, it promised and makes promises concerning the New Covenant, living under the terms of the New Covenant. And Paul, when he addressed that, he brings that in from Ezekiel or whatever passage in the Old, he's talking about then the context of living under the New Covenant, not the Old. So what are the promises of the New Covenant? That is the point. Do I go back to Ezekiel again? Let's see. Get this right. Since I couldn't figure it out. Come on, you can go back. I know you can. There you go. So what's the promise? My servant David shall be king over them, and they shall have one shepherd. They shall walk in my rules and be careful to obey my statutes. They will dwell in the land that I gave my servant Jacob, where your fathers lived. There the children and their children shall dwell there forever. And David my servant shall be their prince forever. So this is talking about what? When David becomes king, the son of David, Jesus. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will set them in their lands. New covenant, people. I will multiply them and set my sanctuary in their midst forever. The new covenant, people. My dwelling place shall be with them, and I will be their God. New covenant, people. This is all new covenant promises. It is not promises made under the old covenant. In other words, did my servant David be king over them during the old covenant? He became in the new covenant, became king. In the one sense where he ascended to the throne and became king, and Lord of Lords. So, yeah, you see that he fails to understand.
Difficult as it is for me to say this, he's right. But he doesn't even agree with himself, because he doesn't believe the resurrection has occurred. But that text, it's not even up for debate.
See, he wants to say the resurrection. That Ezekiel was talking about the resurrection? I don't think so. He was talking about the resurrection of Israel. Was that fulfilled in that time period? You better believe it was. So I'm not talking about the general resurrection not being fulfilled. That's, wow.
But that text is talking about resurrection and the reunification of the whole house of Israel.
And that happened in those days. Nobody said that didn't happen, that resurrection of the house of Israel.
And here we have an example of Holy Spirit quoting his own words and applying the fulfillment present tense as Paul is writing these words.
In the context of the 37, that issue, again, I've repeated over and over again, Roy, it is all about the new covenant context, because David is sitting on his throne. That happened after his ascension, did it not? So we're talking about the period when David sat on his throne, when he ascended into heaven, became.
To the Corinthians, that you are the temple of the living God, as God has said, and he quotes verbatim from Ezekiel 37, and then says, having.
Because we become the temple, that is terms of the new covenant, not the old. The old covenant, they were never told that they were going to be the temple of God. We are the temple. The church is the temple.
Present tense. These promises. So even to Stephen's admission that all promises of the old covenant had to be fulfilled.
Old covenant. See, there you go. There's where he screws it all up. It is not the promises of the old covenant. Those are the promises of the new covenant told in the old covenant. Old Testament. See the distinction? See the problem here? It makes it sound like that he can never talk about anything concerning the church age, and when David sits on his throne, and all those things, all concerned after the old covenant is over with. But he wants to take all those things and say they're still part of the old. Do you see that thinking, people? That is what's wrong.
Then he admits by accident that the resurrection has occurred.
The resurrection of Israel has occurred, yes.
So let's look at another text as we consider this.
No, you don't have to look at another one. We already demonstrated here that you failed to understand the context, that the Old Covenant prophecies, in the Old Testament prophecies, concerned New Covenant prophecies, meaning things that will happen underneath the New Covenant. Just because it was in the Old Testament does not mean it's an Old Testament prophecy. It also includes promises of people and the nature of the kingdom under the New Covenant. And he fails to grasp that point. I don't need to rehammer it over and over again with the rest of the things that he does. We can leave it alone right there and let it rest. Roy, continue. This is your problem. All right, thank you guys for watching again, and I probably will publish this because that is an important point to make and to show that distinction of where Roy totally blows it because he doesn't know how to do exegesis. All he does is use word associations. He looks for the word promises, and then tries to tie that all into the Old Covenant, when in actuality, like I've said several times now before, the Old Testament describes the promises underneath the New Covenant. So those promises are being talked about are the New Covenant, not the Old Covenant. He doesn't understand that distinction.